Hello and welcome to Chapter 3 of Marketing 3340. I want to first preface this video by telling you you may look at the information or have read the information and thought, "Ooh, this is getting deep." Keep in mind, this is a very, very introductory course. We are just trying to learn terms and understand what things are. We're not actually dealing with them in an in-depth manner. You will find an assignment, a very simple assignment, that sort of demonstrates some of the theories that we're going to go over in this chapter. But again, we're just trying to introduce terminology so that you understand what it is and how it's used. Okay, so don't get overwhelmed by some things here that you may have never seen before. This text always usually comes out with some type of a poll question. Focus groups are sufficient research tools for most decision problems. Some of you may not even know what a focus group is yet, and you wouldn't be able to answer that question. But within the material, it will talk about focus groups. And I'll give you a brief example. My wife and I were in Las Vegas a few years ago, well, actually several years ago, and we were asked to participate in a focus group that was being held in one of the casinos. And what it turned out to be was a Hollywood studio was creating focus groups to view a program that they were creating for one of the major networks. And they wanted to see the general reaction of the focus group of the humor that was in the sitcom that they were showing. And that sitcom was The Big Bang Theory. And so it wasn't the original actors, but they were showing us a brief clip of this sitcom to see. They were trying to test it to see if people would get the humor or appreciate the humor. And that was a focus group. Now, they didn't make their final decision from that, but they used it as part of their decision. So the answer to this question would probably be somewhere in the middle. We wouldn't strongly disagree, but we wouldn't strongly agree either that it would be sufficient to make all decisions. Sometimes they will also post a fast fact. I thought this was interesting, so I left it in the slides. Only 5% of U.S. adults report doing vigorous activity on any given day compared to 80% who report watching TV on any given day. So I don't think that is a very good statistic, but it's probably one that is very close to being actual fact. Here are the learning objectives. There's a lot of learning objectives in this chapter. Again, just take a look at these. Don't become overwhelmed. Trust me, this chapter will not be that difficult. There are three types of research design: exploratory, descriptive, and causal. We're going to take a look at all three, but just think of the words that basically name these researches designs. Exploratory, so you're exploring, trying to discover ideas, get insights. Descriptive, we're trying to describe a population with respect to important variables. In fact, the assignment, the very brief, short, simple assignment that I have for this chapter is more of a descriptive research. And then there's causal research, which is used to establish cause and effect. So if this happens, then that happens. These are the three types of research design. But I think the easiest way to learn them is just by their name themselves. Explore, you're trying to discover. Descriptive, you're trying to describe. And causal, cause and effect. So exploratory research, we're searching for clues at a crime scene to establish what happened. Okay, that's a really good example. Descriptive research would be interviewing the witnesses and suspects. The suspected killer was 5'11", weighed approximately 400 pounds. Causal research, determine whether the evidence is sufficient to convict a suspect of a crime. So his fingerprints were on the gun. The bullet that killed the victim was shot from the gun. Therefore, because of that, we suspect and have uh, this suspected criminal as the suspect. So here it just shows how these research designs are interactive. Okay, sometimes we need all three types of these research designs in order to solve a problem or in order to come up with a decision. Some of the things we can do through exploratory research, where we're just trying to discover certain aspects. We could do a literature search, which would be a secondary data that we could find information from. Maybe we wanted to find the average age of those who live in Marion County, West Virginia. So we could do a literature search. We could actually go to the census data to find that out. We could search popular press, trade, and academic literature. There's all sorts of information out there. So exploratory research really starts with literature search because it's very inexpensive. Then there's depth interviews where we actually interview people, knowledge about whatever we're looking at or investigating. Focus groups, as we talked about earlier, small group interviews that rely on group discussion. And then case analysis, where we're actually taking a look at something that's already happened. Here are some examples of those four exploratory research examples. Here's what I was talking about with the focus group. Sometimes it's not easy to use a focus group solely. We have to use different types of research because focus groups have two pitfalls. So because it is easy for managers to see what they expect to see in a focus group. If we've already got our mind set on something and we think we know the answer, we can sometimes listen to the focus groups and inadvertently confirm what we're thinking. And focus groups are just one form of exploratory research. Shouldn't be expected to deliver the final results or the answers to our problem. Yet sometimes many managers will just use a focus group. I can tell you that the focus group that my wife and I were involved in Las Vegas with the Big Bang Theory, that was not their only form of research. They researched not only the focus group audiences, they interviewed people on the street. They also had viewings with executives who were experienced in that industry and so forth. Descriptive research is where we're just trying to describe the characteristics of certain groups. This is going to be very evident in your assignment. It's a very simple assignment, but it's very simple descriptive research, trying to determine the proportion of people who behave in a certain way, make specific predictions, determine a relationship between variables. So in your research, you're going to be asked to interview just a handful of people and ask them their favorite restaurants, their top 3 restaurants, whether they be dine-in or takeout. But you're going to describe those individuals by sex, male or female, and age. There's several age categories that you'll be using. And it's just simple descriptive research example. But when we're describing something, think of the who, what, when, where, why, and how, because that's what key questions of descriptive research uncover. And this is very similar to your assignment. But if we were trying to find out what age of the population prefers a certain athletic store, we could set up a dummy table, and I've already done that for you in your assignment. Set up a dummy table to look at who prefers what. Now, the dummy table that you'll be using is a little bit different, but it's very similar as well. When we're looking at descriptive studies, we can look at different types: continuous panel, discontinuous panel, and a sample survey. The continuous panel and discontinuous panel all fall under the longitudinal, and the sample survey falls under the cross-sectional. The only thing I really want you to remember here is that sample surveys are cross-sectional and that the continuous and discontinuous panels are longitudinal. Okay, but don't over concern yourself with this. So this is where some people think, oh, wait a minute, this is getting a little difficult. That's not the case here. If you take a look at that longitudinal analysis, these are repeated measures over time of a fixed sample. Okay, so it's a fixed amount of people that we're interviewing, we're taking a look at. And so within those panels, there's continuous panels where we look at the same variables each time. And then the discontinuous panel is simply different variables, using different variables. So continuous looks at the same. Discontinuous means we look at different variables each time. Cross-sectional is a single point in time measures a sample selected from the population. Okay, so we might take 1,200 people in West Virginia on Tuesday and ask them a question. Causal research basically has that cause and effect. So if X happens, then Y happens. Okay? And basically, the point of the experiment is to change the levels of X to see what happens with Y. So that's causal research. If we add 20 gallons of water to the solution, then the solution is only Y% effective. If we add 30% water, the Y solution is X% effective. There are some experiments in causal research. There's laboratory experiments and field experiments. Why don't you take a look at those? And all this is in your book. I'm just going over it to highlight it and to help you understand it a little bit better. If you have any questions, I always encourage you to email me, and we can set up a time. We can either answer. I can either answer your question over email, or we can always set up a time for virtual office hours to speak over the phone. But the book lays this out in very good detail. Here's just some examples of causal research experiments. And again, some definition for standard test market, controlled test market, and simulated test market, and some examples as well. So again, this is just getting you familiar with the terms. And as we go through the course, this will be laid out and make sense to you. So please, again, don't be overwhelmed by all this unfamiliar information. Just trying to get your feet wet into some of the terminology. And here is taking a look at the standard test market, controlled test market, and simulated test market, and ranking them on their characteristics. So for speed, a standard test market is not the best. However, a simulated test market is most favorable for speed as well as cost and security. You can see here it ranks very high on the first 4 and then very low on the last 2. Whereas standard test market is just the opposite. And controlled test market is in the middle. So if I was trying to save money, I may go to the simulated test market, because I could set up a test in a controlled environment, simulate it, perhaps on a computer. Where a controlled test market, I might set up something where I control the actual market. In other words, if I was let's say I was test marketing a new type of Target store, and I wanted to open up, if Target wanted to open up a smaller store in New York City, which they have, one of the first things they did is they set up a controlled test market. And they set up this small store, much smaller than their average Target stores, in downtown New York City. And they basically watched to see what consumers were buying and how they reacted to the smaller store. That's a controlled test market before they rolled it out to the rest of the nation. And I believe they're still conducting that, or they've rolled it out into some larger metro areas where the simulated market would be probably done through computers. And that's the chapter, pretty much. Like I said, I'm always concerned with students getting a little overwhelmed at this point, and it's still early on in the course. Don't be, okay? Don't be overwhelmed. You will find the assignment to be very simple, and I will lay things out even on the quiz that just go over the very basics. All right? So we're just trying to learn terminology as we go through this. So again, this is chapter 3. Please do the assignment. The quiz will not be up until you finish chapter 4. Okay, so finish the chapter 3 assignment and then move on and proceed to chapter 4. Hope all is going well and you're social distancing and staying safe, and I will talk to you soon.